Peter, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us, and it's great to be here in New York City, right?
New York City is the city of the world, isn't it? Specifically, when you're coming from London, right? You always have that, either you like London or New York City. I like both, but
that's true. Well, look, lots to unpack in this conversation. Clearly, we've prepared for this ahead of being here, and I think really what we want to do is dive into some insights from your learnings over your 25 to 30 year career. It would be good, first of all, before we dive into some of those insights in a bit more detail, to maybe get a bit of a summary of your kind of career to date and what you're up to now, if that's okay.
No, absolutely. So I had two very different experience for the last 30 years, because I basically had two jobs. Most recently now, I'm the CEO for a fintech or a payment firm, which is like a VC startup, that kind of mentality. Everything is a possibility, opportunities, agile, working quickly, but lack of sort of framework and capital, and you have to make it happen anyway.
Right.
And then I spent 20 plus years in Nasdaq, which is, I probably would say, the very opposite. Institution, highly regulated, clear playbook, governance, compliance, less of this, like, even though you would like to foster that kind of culture of everything is an opportunity, you still have the foundation to sit on and try to excel from there. So two very different experiences.
I bet,
would
yeah.
say.
And I'm curious to understand, transitioning from that kind of heavily regulated, highly process-driven environment into a dynamic, scale-up startup environment. What's been your biggest surprise?
The biggest surprise, I probably would say, first of all, you notice that the people that work in the startup is vastly different than the people that are working in that kind of institutional environment that Nasdaq was. Very different. And I think people tend to be drawn to that. So that's why you normally see less of movement between the two worlds, I would say.
Right.
So the typical, like the Silicon Valley world is like, you have that kind of personality, and those people, I'm generalizing now, right? So there are pockets of people that are moving between them, but they don't like that kind of institution, etc. And the other way around.
Right.
It's like people coming from that, and you know exactly what you're going to do when you're coming in the morning. And then you're coming with that everything is sort of loose, and it's up to you to make it happen, etc. And some people just doesn't like that.
Yeah.
So the first thing I notice, it's very different kind of mindset in the people that's working in the two different companies.
And so I imagine that leading in those two different environments is completely different as well.
Very different. Extremely different. But also, my experience was a little bit unique, because I also changed right when the pandemic broke out.
Right.
So I wouldn't really been able to tell exactly what the difference, because I think everyone went through such a dramatic change how to run a company when the pandemic hit, because, sure, some companies were remote already, right? So the change was not really, but most of them had some kind of office to go into, some kind of physical interaction, and all that. And suddenly, the world was sitting at home and lockdown, and now you have to figure out how do you lead a company from here.
And how have you adapted to kind of meet the demands of this new challenging environment?
So high demand on communication. Like, you could pick up if someone didn't get sort of the objectives and etc. by walking around. Now you really have to make sure you almost overworking your communication strategy. So that becomes more important.
And does that become micromanagement at a point?
I don't like micromanagement myself, because if you have to micromanage people, I feel you probably have the wrong people. and they perhaps will be less engaged, etc. But it's a good point, though. So how do you, in that kind of remote, how do you know that people actually work on the right stuff and etc.? So KPIs and objectives and follow-up and taking in feedback and so all that becomes much more important than when you have a physical working environment.
Yeah, so you still have the formal structures, but they become more online first rather than just having those chats over the
and exactly and I'm not saying that FaceTime was necessarily the solution, absolutely not, but being a part of like that physical thing, and you can work in teamworks and etc. And now you don't see people for days, weeks, months.
Yeah.
How do you know that they are still engaged and etc.? And there are tools for this, of course. Some have adopted kind of micromanagement, like monitoring employees and etc. It's not what I'm coming from. I'm more from being transparent on objectives.
Yeah.
And then that people understand how they fit into the main strategy, etc. So they feel a purpose.
Of course.
Why are they doing this? What's
Right.
their contribution? What would it lead to if they're doing their job and etc. I think that would drive more passion and engagement. But once again, in a remote, how do you know?
Of course. And is that about literally starting conversations by saying, here's the big objective, and then working that back into whatever you're talking about for that individual?
Yeah, and I have to admit, so it's easy to sit. Like, it sounds easy when we're talking like this, right? I have tons of scars of try and errors, specifically the first 2-3 years. When you're working through this remotely, you think you articulated, your strategy and the goals and etc. clearly, and then you figure out down the road that was not that clearly.
Right.
People interpreted it differently. Some didn't understand, or perhaps didn't speak up. Some people wanted it to be articulated in a different way so they could understand it. And it becomes more important when you're remote again, because otherwise you call for a town hall, right?
Yeah.
If you're like a local company, perhaps you have the luxury to gather everyone in the same office.
Yeah.
Or if you're an international company, perhaps you have to travel around and see people individually and make sure everyone is on board.
Of course.
With what we're doing, what's the objective, why are we doing this?
Yeah. So it's about having a really, really clear message and then repeating it.
Exactly, and I learned the hard way by thinking I did something clearly, and then it doesn't matter what I think,
Right.
because if my staff and my company doesn't get that, it's on me. It's not on them.
Yeah. And then you get that through the feedback loop by
Exactly.
checking in and having that regular communication. Yeah. Interesting. And so going back to the concept of having this kind of need to ever evolve your skills as a leader, especially in today's world, but probably more broadly as a leader ever, right? But how do you actually do that? What's your process for kind of learning and developing new skills?
I think you have to break it down in pieces. It's important for people to understand the overall objectives and strategy, etc. But most people will have it difficult to break it down to, I get it, but what is it I'm supposed to do, right? How do I fit in here, and etc.
Right.
So it becomes to breaking down everything from like the board is putting, it's like, hey, you have to grow with this. These are the expectations from the shareholders, etc.
Right.
And then you have a strategic conversation, and you break it down in pieces like objectives. And the further down in the organization you come, the smaller those pieces and objectives becomes. But it has to fit into the overall goal, obviously. Otherwise, you won't be successful. But it's important for people that is down in organization understand why are they doing this,
right?
And how is this fitting into the overall objective? If you think about like nurses and doctors, what keeps them up working the night shift, week out and years, and because they're very passionate and they believe what they do.
See the impact.
And if you can translate that into like a fintech firm and etc., that people feel that about the product you're building.
Yeah.
what's the purpose of that product? What's the problem that's going to resolve? Either you sell it to consumers or you sell it to businesses. But at the end of the day, if your team doesn't understand the problem statement you're resolving, they're going to have a hard time to understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, and then you'll see impact on productivity as a result.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I've been through this process of creating a mission statement and, and then working that back into a set of values and principles. And it's really, really hard to do it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you actually think that you're there, and then you look at it again a week later and you realize you're not quite. And that's kind of an ever evolving thing.
It is. And I mean, it's you asked me more tangible, like how do you do it? And some of the lesson learned I had when I came into to my current firm where I am, it was very, the majority of the employees was like engineers.
Right.
And I sort of, we created this, the typical missions statement and, strategy and etc. And we were struggling of getting the buy-in from the engineering team, and I was like, what do you need? At the end of the day, what they wanted to see is like real tangible, like flow charts.
Right.
Like, explain to me how this product is going to work. Right. And,
yes.
and I was like, okay, that's what you want to see.
Right.
And that's what they needed. And then people was like, wow, this really makes sense.
Okay, but for that audience, are they still bothered about what impact that product has, or just how it works, do you think?
No, because for them, they needed to translate this like the problem statement. Yeah, sure, I hear you, but show me actually how it's going to work.
Yeah. Is it that cynical view?
So they were not impressed of my, my lack of attempt to create like a McKinsey style of, they were not impressed at all. They wanted to have more tangible evidence. It's like, sure, that sounds great, but...
Yeah, prove it.
Prove it.
Show it to
exactly.
me. That's interesting, isn't it? And it is like, it's adapting your kind of style for the audience that's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's even more difficult to do when you've got an audience of different people, different characteristics and different roles around the firm.
It is, because that strategy that worked for them would have been backfired completely if I walked into like a CFO, like because then you will like have a different kind of interpretation of how the product works and etc. They don't want to go down to the nitty-gritty stuff,
right?
Necessarily, at least not in the beginning, in the buy-in.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's very interesting. And coming back to your point around incentives, right? We think about this a lot because traditionally I think our industry is, it's incentive driven financially. Mm-hmm. People are incentivized through commission, mm-hmm. right? But I've done quite a bit of research, and as I understand it, commission doesn't necessarily drive results.
Yeah.
And people don't really care about that financial mm-hmm. incentive as much as you would have thought that they might.
Yeah.
Right? Have you seen this?
I have. And I do know it's kind of controversial because going down a road where you don't have like bonus and etc. Could absolutely backfire, because I think that is a component that would drive some grit.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I agree with you, because at the end of the day, if people are only there to collect a paycheck and don't feel sort of any kind of tie or into a bigger purpose, over time, I think you will have problem to drive productivity. Mm. You need to find that, like, what is really driving Luke.
Yeah.
But most people, like myself, are working because I have to put food on the table for my family, etc. So economics becomes important. I do, I have the luxury of having being European. Obviously, from the beginning, been here now for a long time. It is a sort of the U.S. corporate style incentive, and then you have a lot of. I shouldn't generalize all European countries because it's different from country to country, obviously. But I would say that it's more common here to be driven by bonuses and etc.
Right.
And I went through the same because I came in through like merging cultures between a European company and a US company. And And we went through that. And it was clearly that Europeans were more, I was like, well, but I'm doing this because I like my work and I like to contribute and I believe in it. It's like, so they were less sort of, they took it obviously when they were offered. But whereof in the US, you probably would have a hard time to recruit people unless you had that sort of extra.
Yeah, it's one thing that I've noticed culturally in the US. Actually, there's this. It's like extreme capitalism, right? Which in a corporate environment is a great thing because it gives people that drive and ambition to grow and develop.
Yeah.
But it is very different to European culture, I think.
Yeah, I think it is, and that's where you have to figure out when you. Specific for leaders and employees that are going through sort of this merger, when you're going through different cultures, you need to understand that first, so you don't kill. Because if you can leverage the best of both, you can create really, really strong bonds and
I bet.
Teams.
I bet. Sounds easy. Imagine it's very, very difficult to pull that off.
Super difficult. You need scars there. You need to see. You have to go through it yourself and see what's working and what's not working.
And then you learn and you implement using that experience. Fascinating. And so you've obviously been through this yourself. Did you nail it first time?
No. No, I didn't actually. And we so I was a part of this big stock exchange group in the northern part of Europe that was merging with Nasdaq. And the senior management team and the exec team that I was a part of, we went through like culture training.
Right.
To see, how and I'm not sure, to be honest, without, throwing anyone on the bus from my former colleagues, but I'm not sure the US side did the same. I think they had more of an approach like the, rolling out their own, philosophies and etc. And that was tough. And a lot of people didn't survive it.
Right.
Because you have to adopt quickly.
Yeah. And it's so much of it is about building trust, which comes back to clear communication and being able to develop relationships, right?
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. And obviously, I know it's a bit of a sidestep from what we're talking about here, but up until now, I've always kind of assumed that developing STEM skills and maybe going into a career of engineering would be the path for like my kids, for example, right? But actually, I think when I look at it today, sales capability or communication skills and relationship building, those human elements are probably far more important, right? Especially as you start to climb the ladder and you get into more senior levels within your career. Yeah. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. If you ask my kids, they would tell you, because I have 2 graduated sons and 1 daughter in college right now. And we had this conversation, me and my wife and my sons and my daughter, when they went in. I was like, where's the future? And at that time, AI was like, you knew AI, but it's really the last year or so it starts to take off. Come in. And we talked about what do we believe the need is going to be in the future. In my experience, regardless if you're like a trainee or you're a CEO or chairman, communication is like the most important skill set.
Right.
You could learn. You can learn communication as well, obviously, but you can learn a lot of the techniques and the secret sauce of whatever you're doing. But if you can't articulate that and back to my own failure in communicating to my engineers, like they wanted me to articulate that in a different way.
Right.
And I had to in order to get their buy-in and understanding. So I think communication and understanding people's behavior, etc., is always going to be super important, regardless where you are in an organization. Yeah,
and there's a scary concept that actually when people are learning when they're kids, relationship building, problem solving, communication is probably not the most important thing that they are focused on, right?
No,
Or it
probably
should
not.
be, but it's not the thing that they're focused on as the priority, I
Yeah.
suppose. But
Yeah.
hopefully it will change.
Hopefully change. I think US schools are good because they start early of having the kids making speeches and etc. and getting exposure and be able to tell a story or something like that. So I think they're pretty good. That's why we as sort of Europeans were almost thinking that Americans are so outgoing and
Yes.
I was like, but because I think they're getting it like from school almost.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good to know, actually. Okay, cool. Well, that's a good start to the conversation, right? I think we've dived into communication styles, leadership skills, evolving your leadership skills there. The next piece that I think you talked about when we talked about your key learnings over your career is you talked about execution beats strategy.
Yeah.
I think I said to you, I think we should talk about strategy and how to develop a strategy. And you
Yeah.
said, well, great, but execution beats strategy.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
So I can break it down in pieces, but in general, I think I rather have a less good product, but really good execution than the other way around. Like a really good product, but lack of execution.
Right.
And I think history is full of people that didn't succeed with fantastic ideas or even fully developed products, but they didn't succeed, and then something else that was less good, succeeded.
Right.
And it comes down to like execution at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's not the same saying you don't need a strategy, obviously. You do, but if that last piece of it is so important, how your go-to-market strategy.
Right.
The experience of your clients. Do you have who's actually talking to the clients? Sometimes people in a corporate doesn't understand that. It's like, why? I thought it was this part of the company that had the most interference with the client, but it was something else. It was like a back office.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then obviously, wow. So those are the people we need to train on how to interact with the clients. And
yeah, of course. Oh, that's really interesting. And so, but when we talk about execution in this sense, what do you mean?
So execution for me is to understand how your product's going to work, what kind of resources you need,
Right.
and how to implement that. Because if you don't have the right skill set or people or even resources in technology, etc., you won't be able to be successful, basically.
Right.
And so it comes down to, for me, I'm looking for people that can complement me, right? I'm not looking for the same person I am and my skill sets, because why? I already have that. I need to be people that could complement me, hopefully are better than me and can learn and teach me. Mm-hmm. And you're creating a team where you're also making sure that they feel safe on bringing up stuff when it happens and etc. Because I think operating an entity or a company today is so different from just like 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Right.
Today you have to grow, like you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable in a way. Because if you're waiting with making decisions and etc. until you have like 100% of the information, your competitors will be far gone.
Right.
So when it comes to like execution, you need to have a team that could quickly adopt. They are engaging with their own team, and it's like sort of a bottom-up assessment, because things are moving so quickly. So if you don't get the information fast from what's happening on the front line, what's the feedback from your clients, etc., and if you don't streamline upwards in the right pace, you would lose out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you at the end of the day, there are tools today, of course, that you have to implement in order to be effective. How to measure, sales performance and how product is working and the feedback directly from the clients and etc.
Yeah.
So you can quickly adopt.
Change and evolve, and that kind of change-ready mindset is something that is probably more relevant in today's world than maybe ever before, right?
Very different. My former CEO had us to read Jeff Bezos' CEO letter.
Yes.
Every year. And
Amazing.
CEO letters are normally maybe not the most fun to read. But his was like the art of, almost like the secret sauce of Amazon.
Right.
And this is many years back, and he said something that was stick with me. And he said that years ago you had the luxury of waiting, getting all the information, and having the building the analysis and all that stuff, and then you execute. And now you don't have that luxury anymore. It goes so much quicker.
Of course.
So you have to be able to create a team that you can execute with don't have all the information. And then you need to be able to adapt quickly. It's like almost try and error.
Yeah.
That didn't work. What do we do about it?
Yeah.
Is it worth fixing, or should we just retire that, move on to the next thing? And that is very different from just 10, 20 years ago.
Of course. Yeah, there's a couple of things that spring to mind there. People can't have an ego in that environment, right? Because you almost need to challenge yourself constantly. You make a decision on something, and if you're proven wrong, you need to accept that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a sea change from how we've seen corporate structures evolve, maybe. And then also I think, whenever I'm asked for business book recommendations, I always talk about working backwards, which is the Amazon book. And you see those structures that they have internally have enabled them to scale many different businesses that have all outperformed each other and all setting new benchmarks, globally across any industry, right? And that's it's immense, really.
Yeah.
But it comes back to strategy, principles, and then everyone being on the same page, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think you have all those, I'm sure you read the From Good to Great and all those books. And what's good with those is less theory and more empirical. They actually went out and talked to people that
got the data,
had all those successful companies. And so they gathered the data and made some conclusions. And some of them were actually controversial, completely against the Boston Consulting Group theories and how you run companies. And I think that's sort of how a lot of today's very successful companies are being operated, because they are moving so quickly, like the Amazon you talked about.
Yeah. So good execution is about collaboration as much as it is anything else, and understanding the customer.
Yeah.
It's quite fascinating. I love that concept from Good to Great about they looked at those leaders that had scaled businesses really quickly and then they dropped off a cliff.
Yes.
And in their interviews, they talked about I and me and not about team and us.
Exactly.
Whereas the level 5 leaders were the opposite, right?
Exactly.
It's really cool, that, isn't it?
And I think they used Wells Fargo as an example, as having an executive team where everyone from that executive team went to become a CEO in a big corporate or something like that.
It's that's amazing, right? And when you think about people leadership from this perspective, what are the attributes that are super important when you're looking at people to hire?
Scars. Have they gone through failures? Have they learned from it? Because that's a part of the process, right? If you find someone with a flawless background, etc., you don't really know how they will react, because sooner or later we will go into some kind of crisis, and etc. So I'm looking for that, lack of egos, right? It can't be any pride, because then they are not going to be objective on decisions. Do I have to retire this product? I worked so long on it, I loved it, but at the end of the day, maybe you have to take a tough decision, and maybe it didn't work, and we have to move on. We have to focus on something else. You can't have egos. So I'm looking for that kind of mindset in people that are open-minded and have no problem of learning as well.
Yeah, it sounds straightforward, but I guess it's difficult to find people that fit that mold, eh? And also, then, if you've got everybody who are operating in that way, do you not then end up with a lack of kind of diverse thinking across a group?
No, actually, I would say very much the opposite. In my experience, by finding that kind of profiles, they have been quite adopted to like a culture where they have to be open-minded because they've gone through so many crises. And so it was like, okay, I guess I wasn't right. I thought I was right. I was not right. Now I had to fix it, etc. And if you have done that a number of times, you're gonna be that kind of individual.
It becomes part of your DNA.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, interesting. Okay, so let's say that you're sitting there, somebody's listening to this, and they have a big implementation in front of them, right? And they're in execution. The kind of strategic thinking's done. It's all about let's go, let's move forward at pace. What practical tips would you give them to make sure that they can master that execution and really nail it?
So people, including myself, tend to sort of almost fall in love with what you do, and then you're being blind of. So every now and then I'm asking people just to take a step back and be a little bit critical to their own process and etc. Because it's like I rather find weaknesses myself and not my client is going to find it, right? So, and that's what I'm asking for the team as well. It's like, take a step back and there's no problem on coming saying, hey, by the way, I think we have done something wrong even though it was this person's idea, right? We rather find that out during the process than after you have rolled it out and that your clients are finding that out.
Interesting.
So there's no pride and there's no problem. I mean, for me, it's like failure is so connected to, like, embedded in the name, like the verb. It's a failure. For me, it's a learning process.
Yes.
I mean, everyone that watched a child learn to walk, it was like, it's a part of the process.
Right.
They stand up, they fall, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, months. Ultimately, they're up and walking.
Yeah.
And the same in business, right? You're going to fall, you're going to be knocked down, and then you have to find out what didn't work, and you're learning from it. And the more you accumulate, you're more humble you're going to be. So you're not going to be so overly. You have to believe in your product.
Yeah.
You have to believe in your team and yourself. Otherwise, you won't succeed. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be naive and sort of stubborn in a way that you don't see through what your client might find out later on.
Yeah, it's the belief in the end goal rather than where you are right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. So then the third insight, which is potentially my favorite of the three, I think, just in terms of the way that you articulated it when we were doing our preparation for this, is you've obviously got this kind of theory of a third, right?
Yeah. The famous 1/3, yeah.
Yeah, the 1/3 rule, and that, doing hard stuff creates great outcomes. Yeah. Right. And all that stuff around embracing the suck. So maybe if you can just give us a little bit of a
absolutely. I got it. First time I got it from one of those superstars in the U.S. Gymnastic Olympic team.
Right.
And she said, you're supposed to feel good third time, feel okay third time, and crappy third time. If you have about that balance, you're doing great. And I thought about it, and I was like, that is exactly how life is and how work is.
Yeah.
Because I would lie to people if I'm recruiting people and say, hey, this is going to be all fun. Because it's not all fun.
Right.
Some people are thriving and think admin and creating reports is the most fun in the world, but they are struggling with like teamwork and creativity and things like that.
Of course.
And the other way around, some people hate administration, but they love sort of the creative part of it. But regardless if you're an intern or CEO, unfortunately that's life, right? You need to do some stuff. You and I are skiers, both, right?
Yeah.
And we love skiing. Do we like standing in the line? No. That's the 1/3 crap. Do I like sit in the lift going up? That's okay. But I love to get to the top,
right?
And go and get to ski down. And that's you have to go through some of that. And if people coming in with that mindset, it's gonna be more okay. It's like, okay, so I have one of those days today. I have to just to grind through this. Mm-hmm. But Luke told me I'm going to work on this exciting, project we're doing. Right. I'm really looking forward to that. And that's going to be super fun. I have that meeting later today. So I'm just going to get this boring stuff done now. Mm. And because that's life, right? So I think that when have my sort of conversations with the team and etc., it's that's the process.
Yeah. So as the CEO, you probably have an ability to design your own kind of schedule, mm-hmm. right? So can you not move yourself towards more of the good stuff that you enjoy and away from the okay and the bad stuff, or is that not possible?
No, I have to do bad stuff because some of the what I consider bad stuff, it's not. It's grinding through things I need to know,
right?
In a way, or need to get done, but I maybe it's not overly excited about. But
okay.
That's sort of one of the cornerstones in order to be able to excel in the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Because if I'm walking up to the fun stuff and didn't do the other stuff, I probably wouldn't be able to execute.
Of course. And it's quite interesting, actually, isn't it? Because the fun stuff for you might be the bad stuff for somebody else, and
exactly.
vice versa.
Exactly.
And actually, that probably makes quite a good team, right?
Yeah. Yes. So that's how you create the team, right? You can't have everyone liking exactly the same thing and not, because then you need to have that diversity in the team. So you have people that are thriving in areas where you might not thriving.
Right. And I often think, with hindsight, it's really easy to understand that you have to embrace some crap to get to good outcomes, right? Yeah. But when you're in that period when you're really going through that pain, and it's or like let's say it's something that's a bit bigger than just a normal kind of administration task or something like that you just don't enjoy doing, right? Yeah. But you're actually in a period where it's tough. The pressure's on and there's stuff going on that you're really kind of under the cosh around, right? Sometimes in those periods you're closest to the best outcomes, right?
Absolutely.
Have you seen this yourself?
Yeah, no, and you started to say embrace the suck, which is one of my favorite themes out there, and I think it's like one of those saying in Navy SEALs or something. But what it means is when you're going through those hard times, instead of complaining about it and just whining for yourself or for someone else, see what do you learn from it, and then you can take, because that's how you're creating good teams. You're learning from that, that process that really sucks.
Yeah.
And that happened to me so many times. Practical examples, all those, crises I'm gone through. Do I want to have them? Absolutely not. I mean, I don't want an incident to happen to a client, or right. I don't want to have a system going down or something like that. But you just have to embrace it. That's what's happening, and then you have to learn from it. You have to grind through it.
Yeah.
And then you would learn what is it we can do better next time.
Yeah.
And you become better.
Yes, but if you're constantly in an imbalance there, where let's say you're in 50% bad or 60% bad, you probably got to figure out how to fix that as well, right?
Yeah, and you have to be mindful, have to pick up where people are, because from time to time, life is life, right? They might go through their own stuff as well with family and etc., and that's right. Gonna be a burden for them, and you have to see how the team could help out and etc. And if someone ends up on only doing boring stuff, obviously, ultimately they would leave.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe that's a person you don't want to leave. So you have to be, you have to observe and be mindful.
Of course.
What's happening in sort of the chemistry in the team and etc.
I really, really love this concept because it's quite a practical way to think about how you set people up for success, right?
Yeah.
And actually, I think I can envisage myself talking to my team about this and kind of saying, yeah, I know this bit's hard, but you've got to do this bit to get to this bit. And it's actually, as long as you're not spending more than a third of your time on it,
Exactly.
as a rule,
Exactly.
you're all good.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not like a daily schedule. Okay, so today I'm just going to do it. That's not how it worked.
I've done my third
You can
bag
have
now.
a week of, not fun,
Yeah.
but it needs to be over time a balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, when you're thinking about putting together a culture and you think about the things that matter there, where does fun and enjoyment come into that as a priority?
So it's my belief that most people would like to feel some kind of purpose.
Right.
It's like
purpose more than fun.
Well, because purpose becomes fun.
Mm.
Because if I feel that this product I'm working on, I understand the purpose of it.
Yeah.
Now I'm a part of something, and then it becomes fun.
Right.
Normally.
It's very true.
So if I feel passionate, I do understand, why are we doing this? What's my contribution? Why do Luke need me here?
Yeah.
If you have articulated that well, for me to go into those working sessions, it's going to be fun. Because now I know why I'm doing it.
Of course. Okay. So we're in an environment where there's a clear vision. That's crystal clear. There's a purpose there because you're driving at that vision. But you've got to suck up the hard stuff along the way.
Yeah.
How do people actually develop that resilience, especially in today as well? Because let's be honest, there is a change in culture, right? Because I think we have people nowadays are expecting things to happen immediately.
Yeah.
And actually recognizing that you've got to put in the hard yards to get the outcomes.
Yeah.
It doesn't come naturally to everybody.
No, and you can see difference between if someone has been working 20 years or someone is just coming in. To your point, if someone has gone through all this, like, embrace the suck.
Yeah.
They have a higher ability to be resilient and grind through it.
Right.
Whereof sort of the younger generation coming out of school, they have this mindset of, if it's not fun, I'm just gonna quit and I'm gonna do something else.
Right.
So it is a challenge. How do you retain that, the new generation? I'm telling my own kids, it's like but that's a part of the process.
Yeah.
That's a part of, in order to develop a muscle, you have to put it through, tension and work and etc. Otherwise, you won't be able to grow it.
Right.
Is that fun all the time? No, that's discipline.
Yeah.
But that discipline would make you much greater, and it would potentially put you in a position that you earn the right to do really fun stuff. You need to celebrate the small victories as well, not only waiting for the biggest one.
The big ones, yeah.
Because it's all the milestones that takes you there that is tough. And specifically the new generation, I think, because they are growing up with this like instant reward through social media and etc.
Right.
And they're just getting this 1,000 times a day. How do you replicate that when you're coming into a work environment where you don't have that, right? You're supposed to work on this now, and I'm not going to tell you every day how brilliant you are.
Of course.
Because that's not really how life is working. So it is a challenge. How do you convince that generation that it's not social media? You don't have that instant feedback or reward.
And how do you celebrate milestones? Is that through like a kudos channel or something like that?
I have to admit, I'm not great at it.
Right.
I have to be better. And that's something we have recognized in our corporate, that we need to do a better job on celebrating those shorter milestones.
Yeah.
But there are corporates that are doing that really, really good.
Right.
They have like a weekly gathering, and they have shout outs and stuff like that, which people can think, oh, that's ridiculous. Why do we need to have shout outs? It was like, but if it's a purpose, like it's like, hey, we did something great this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want people to feel good about it, right?
Exactly.
And like you say, it's the reward along the journey which is important.
Yeah. Me and my chairman agreed like a couple of years ago that we should call each other on Fridays with good news.
Right.
We should end the week with something to celebrate, even though it might be something very small. We should end the week with, it's like, well, we did something good this week.
Yeah. It forces you to reflect, I guess.
It forces you to reflect, but it also forces you to actually achieve something by the end of the week, because you don't want to go into that meeting. It's like, I have nothing to tell you.
That's a very good point. Yeah. And so have you got an example of where you've had to put in the hard yards for a period of time and that's led to a great outcome? And maybe there's something that you can share with us there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a mix of really like have a hard look of like products you fell in love with, and it's like maybe it doesn't work the way it intended, and that's painful because you put in so much hard work and blood and sweat. But once you're going through that, that's like removing a bad relationship. Like it's painful doing it, but you feel maybe hopefully better at once it's done. Yeah. And this is the same. So I've gone through a few of those. That was painful because people were very engaged and felt passionate about it. But you just didn't have sort of the capital or resources. You have to focus on something else. But once you have done that, it's like it's almost a relief.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it was tough, but it was the right decision.
Yeah, really interesting.
And then you have like really like rewarding is like crisis management. When you have a real crisis, like we had a couple of years ago with Silicon Valley Bank, for instance. Right. That was like a near-death experience for us as a corporate and part of our clients. And when you're resolving it as a team and you're getting sort of that reward, that's so refreshing. I mean, it's that's almost worth all the pain you've gone through for months when you see that kind of reward. Specifically if you work it out as a team.
Yeah, definitely. It's I mean, look from a business perspective, I think we saw this play out with COVID, right? I mean, it was a horrible, tough period where no one knew what they were doing, and then once we got our heads around it and things started to recover and life started to go back to a version of normal, we actually saw the market spike, right? And then everyone had a really good period. And
I mean, talking about that period, at that time I had personally have to shift my management style a little bit,
right? And
spend so much time talking to people because people were going through a hard time. You didn't know
personally as well.
Yeah, they were locked down. You don't really know how people live, right? Do they share a small apartment with a spouse, right, or a small kid, or did they lose someone they loved in the pandemic, or you just don't know.
Of course.
And so I spent much more time actually talking non-work related things with people,
right,
than maybe I'm normally doing.
And has that stuck?
Not as intensive, because that was like almost the only thing you spoke about at the time, right?
True.
You had to make sure that your staff were actually standing up and they were doing okay. And I'm not being like cynical and say, well, if I lose everyone, we will lose the company. It was also being engaged in people. It was like, what are people going through?
Yes.
Because if I could understand that, I could manage through sort of expectations and deliverables. And
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I think everyone evolved in that period and probably grew quite a lot as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But fascinating. So I think you've shared some amazing insights in this conversation. I think a lot of it comes down to proper communication style and having that kind of ability to set clear goals for people and then communicate effectively to them through the journey, right? And I think some of the concepts that you've shared with us today are hopefully going to be really, really useful to people. My last question to you, as always, I always ask this question at the end of these conversations is, so what do you know now when you stand here and at the stage you're at in your career that you really wish you knew when you were right at the start?
I would say spend less energy with what you think other people think about you. Because if you focus on execution and being respectful to your colleagues and etc., you would do great. But early on, I was very much of like wanting to be likable at the workplace, and I wanted people to work with me, etc. And that kind of thought process is just sort of a waste of energy, because that's only like the symptom. It's like address the real issue first. It's like if you are perceived as someone that people would like to work with, that they can learn from, and they be treating with respect, etc., you're gonna do well in an organization. So that's one thing. The other one is don't wait too long with making decisions. Sometimes a decision, even though it might not be the best one, is better than not making a decision. So I think early on, a lot of people, including myself, were probably afraid of making decisions because you didn't understand, what happens if I make the wrong decision? Am I going to be fired, etc. And that's a dangerous place to be in. Of course. So if I would tell my younger myself, I would say, don't be afraid of making decisions. Just be observe what's happening, and don't have an ego of your decision. It's like, if it was the wrong decision, it was the wrong decision. Then fix it.
I love that. Very good. And look, it's resonated with me personally, so hopefully it will resonate with others as well. But thank you very much for your time. It's been really
Thank
great.
you for having me.